Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons, Chapter 4. The timeless leaden day merged imperceptibly toward eve. After the rude midday meal, Adam was bid by Judith to put Viper, the vicious gelding, between the shafts of the buggy, and to drive backwards and forwards to Howling 6 times to revive his knowledge of the art of managing a horse. His attempt to stave off this event by having a fit during the rude meal was unfortunately robbed of its full effect by the collapse of Miriam, the hired girl, while in the act of passing a dish of greens to Seth. Her hour had come upon her rather sooner than was anticipated, and in the ensuing scene Adam's fit, which he had staged in the cowshed out of regard for his personal comfort and safety, passed almost unnoticed, except as a sort of Greek chorus to the main drama. Adam was therefore left without any excuse, and spent the afternoon driving backwards and forwards between Howling and the farm, much to the indignation of the Starkadders, who could see him from their position at the side of the well they were supposed to be getting on with. They thought he was an idle old man, and said as much. "How shall I know the maiden?" pleaded Adam of Judith, as they stood together while he lit the lanthorn hanging on the side of the buggy. Its dim flame flowered up slowly under the vast, uncaring bowl of the darkening sky, and hung heavily, like a brooding corpse light, in the windless dusk. "Robert Post was I, like a bullock, a great mothering man. I, playing with batses and bowls. Do you think his maid'll be like him?" "There are not so many passengers as all that at Beershorn," replied Judith impatiently. "Wait till everybody has left the station. Robert Post's child will be the last. She will wait to see if there is anyone to meet her. Be off with you," and she struck the gelding upon his hocks. The great beast bounded forward into the gloom before Adam could check him. They were gone. Darkness fell, a clouded bell of dark glass eclipsing the soggy landscape. By the time the buggy reached Beershorn, which was a good 7 miles from Howling, Adam had forgotten what he was going there for. The reins lay between his knotted fingers, and his face, unseeing, was lifted to the dark sky. From the stubborn interwoven strata of his subconscious, thought seeped up into his dim conscious, not as an integral part of that consciousness, but more as an impalpable emanation, a crepuscular addition from the unsleeping life in the restless trees and fields surrounding him. The country for miles under the blanket of the dark, which brought no peace, was in its annual torrented ferment of spring growth, worm-jarred with worm and with seed. Frond leapt on root, and hair on hair. Beetle and finch fly were not spared. The trout sperm in the muddy hollow under nettlefitch weir were agitated, and well they might be. The long screams of the hunting owls tore across the night, scarlet lines on black. In the pauses every 10 minutes they mated. It seemed chaotic, but it was more methodically arranged than you might think. But Adam's deafness and blindness came from within, as well as without. Earthy calm seeped up from his subconscious and met descending calm in his conscious. Twice the buggy was pulled out of hedges by a passing farmhand, and once narrowly shaved the vicar driving home from tea at the hall. "Where are you, my birdling?" Adam's blind lips asked the unanswering darkness and the loudest shapes of the unbudded trees. "Did I coddle thee as a moment for this?" He knew that Elphine was out on the downs, striding on her unsteady colt's legs toward the hall in the bright sardonic hands of Richard Hawk-Monitor. Adam's mind played uneasily in bewildered pain with the vision of his nursling between those casual fingers. But the buggy reached Beershorn at last, and safely. There was only one road, and that led to the station. Adam pulled Viper up on his haunches, just as the great gelding was about to canter through the entrance to the booking hall, and knotted the reins on the rennet post near the horse trough. Then animation fell from him. A sucked straw, his body sunk into the immemorial posture of a man thought-whelmed. He was a tree trunk, a toad on a stone, a pie-thatched owl on a bough. Humanity left him abruptly. For some time he brooded, but time conveyed to him nothing of itself. It spun endlessly upon a bright point in space, repeating the names of Elphine and Richard Hawk-Monitor. If time passed, and presumably it did, for a train came in and its passengers got out and were driven away, there was no time for Adam. He was at last roused by an obscure agitation which seemed to be taking place on the floor of the buggy. The straw, which had lain upon the floor for the past 25 years, had been energetically kicked out into the road by a small foot shod in a stout but shapely shoe. The light of the lantern showed nothing above this save a slender ankle and a green skirt, considerably agitated by the movements of the leg which it covered. A voice from the darkness above his head was remarking, "How revolting!" Muttered Adam, peering blindly up into the vague air beyond the lantern's rays. "Nay, niver do that, soul. That straw was good enough for Miss Judith's wedding trip to Brighton, and it must serve, straw, chaff, leaf, or fruit. We mun all come to it." "Not while I can prevent myself," the voice assured him. "And I can believe most things about Sussex and cold comfort, but not that Cousin Judith ever went to Brighton. Now, shall we be getting along? If you have finished brooding, my trunk is coming up to the farm by the carrier's van tomorrow. Not," the voice went on with a certain tartness, "that you would be likely to care if it stayed down here until it's seeded." "Robert Post's child," muttered Adam, staring up at the face he could now dimly see beyond the circle of lantern light. But I was sent here to meet 'ee, and I niver saw 'ee." "I know," said Flora. Child, began Adam, his voice rising to a wail, but Flora thought otherwise. She checked him by asking him if he would prefer her to drive Viper, and this so affronted his male pride that he unhitched the reins from the rennet post, and the buggy drove off without any more delay. Flora sat, with her fur jacket drawn close round her throat against the chill air, nursing her small case containing her nightgown and toilet articles upon her knees. She had not been able to resist the impulse to slip into this small case at the last moment her dearly loved copy of the Pensies of the Abbé Fosmagar. Her other books would come up in her trunk tomorrow, but she had felt that she would find it easier to meet the Starkatters in a proper and civilized frame of mind if she had her copy of Pensies, surely the wisest book ever compiled for the guidance of a truly civilized person, close at hand. The Abbé's other and greater work, The Higher Common Sense, which had won him a doctorate of the University of Paris at the age of 25, was in her trunk. She thought of the Pensies as the buggy left the lights of Beershorn behind and began to mount the road which led to the invisible downs. Her spirits were somewhat discomposed. She was chilly and felt soiled, though indeed she did not look it by the rigors of her journey. The prospect of what she would find at Cold Comfort was not calculated to cheer her spirits. She thought of the Abbé's warning, "Never confront an enemy at the end of a journey unless it happens to be his journey," and was not consoled. Adam did not say a word to her during the drive, but that was all right, because she did not want him to. He could be coped with later. The drive did not last so long as she had feared, because Viper seemed to be a pretty good horse, and went at a smart pace. Flora supposed the Starkatters had not owned him for long, and in less than an hour the lights of a village appeared in the distance. "Is that howling?" asked Flora. "Ah, Robert Post, child." There did not seem to be anything more to say. She fell into a slightly more comfortable muse, wondering what her rights were, those rights which her cousin Judith had mentioned in her letter, and who had sent the postcard with the reference to a generation of vipers, and what was the wrong done by Judith's man to her father, Robert Post. The buggy now began to climb a hill, leaving Howling behind. "Are we nearly there?" "Ah, Robert Post's child." And in another 5 minutes Viper stopped at his own will at a gate which Flora could see in the obscurity. Adam struck him with the whip. He did not move. "I think we must be there," observed Flora. "Nay, never say that." "But I do say it. Look, if you drive on, we shall go slam into a hedge." "'Tis all one, Robert Post's child." "It may be all one to you, and all one, but it isn't to me. I shall get down." So she did, and found her way slowly through darkness only lit by faint winter starlight along a villainous muddy path between hedges, which was too narrow for the buggy to enter. Adam followed her, carrying the lantern and leaving Viper at the gate. The buildings of the farm, a shade darker than the sky, could now be distinguished in the gloom. a little distance on, and as Flora and Adam were slowly approaching them, a door suddenly opened and a beam of light shone out. Adam gave a joyful cry. "'Tis the cowshed! 'Tis our feckless opening the door for me." And Flora saw that it was indeed the door of a shed, which was lit by a lantern being anxiously pushed open by the nose of a gaunt cow. This was not promising, but immediately a deep voice was heard. "Is that you, Adam?" And a woman came out of the cowshed carrying the lantern, which she lifted high above her head to look at the travelers. Flora dimly discerned an unnecessarily red and voluminous shawl on her shoulders, and a trembling mass of hair.
"Oh, how do you do?" she called. "You must be my cousin Judith. I'm so glad to see you. How nice of you to come out in this cold. Terribly nice of you to have me, too. Isn't it curious that we should never have met before?"
She put out her hand, but it was not taken at once. The lantern was lifted higher while Judith steadily looked into her face in silence. The seconds passed. Flora wondered if her lipstick were the wrong shade. It then occurred to her that there was a less frivolous cause for the silence which had fallen, and for the steady regard with which her cousin confronted her. So Flora mused, must Columbus have felt when the poor Indian fixed his solemn, unwavering gaze upon the great sailor's face. For the first time a Starkadder looked upon a civilized being, but one could weary even of this, and Flora soon did. She asked Judith if Judith would think her terribly rude if she did not meet the rest of the family that evening. Might she, Flora, just have a morsel of food in her own room? "It is cold there," said Judith, draggingly at last.
"Oh, a fire will soon warm it up," said Flora firmly. "Too nice of you, I do think, to take so much care of me."
"My sons, Seth and Reuben," Judith choked on the words and recovered and added in a lower voice, "my sons are waiting to see their cousin." This seemed to Flora, in conjunction with their ominous names, too like a cattle show, so she smiled vaguely and said it was nice of them, but she thought all the same she would see them in the morning. Judith's magnificent shoulders rose and fell in a slow, billowy shrug which agitated her breasts. "As you will. The chimney perhaps smokes." "I should think it more than probable," smiled Flora, "but we can see to all that tomorrow. Shall we go in now? But first—" She opened her bag and took out a pencil and tore a leaf from a little diary. "I want Adam to send this wire for me." She had her way. Half an hour later she sat beside a smoky fire in her room, pensively eating 2 boiled eggs. She thought these were safest to ask for. Starkadder bacon, especially if cooked by Adam, might interfere with the long night's rest which she proposed to take, and for which, a short time later, she began to prepare. She was really too sleepy to notice much of her surroundings, and too bored. She wondered if she had been wise to come. She reflected on the length, the air of neglect, and the intricate convolutions of the corridors through which Judith had led her to her bedroom, and decided that if these were typical of the rest of the house, and if Judith and Adam were typical of the people who lived in it, her task would indeed be long and difficult. However, her hand was on the handle of the plough, and she would not turn back, because if she did, Mrs. Smiling would make a particular sort of face, which, in another and more old-fashioned woman, would have meant, "I told you so." And indeed, Mrs. Smiling, far away in Mouse Place, was at that moment reading with some satisfaction a telegram saying, "Worst fears realized. Darling, Seth and Reuben, to send gumboots." And that is the end of Chapter 4.